Hello and welcome to Living My Best Life, the podcast. I'm your host, Jake Liebrix, and together we're going to spend the next 14 episodes learning more about the NDIS application process, specifically for consumers experiencing psychosocial disabilities. We're going to unpack and develop skills through open and honest conversation with people just like us who are working together for a good quality of life for all. The hope and goal is to be able to facilitate an in-house mentoring program where each week you'll have access to extra resources, you'll be able to pop your headphones on and listen to really build up your background knowledge. The program starting back in summer 2021 had a lot of questions and we needed a wide array of consultation to be able to figure out some of the answers to these questions. You know, what are the barriers for people applying to the NDIS with psychosocial disabilities? What are the answers? What boxes need to be checked on the application? There was a lot of questions, not a lot of answers, and so we had to bring in multiple different resources to find those answers. For a bit of insight around that beginning consultation process, we've brought in Christie. Christie, nice to see you. So for those of you at home, Christie was one of the original founding members of this program. So Christie, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Christie. I've been working in this sector for about 6 years now, across a range of different areas, so disability, justice, mental health, and yeah, I've been working in a management role for probably the last few years of that. I came into the project but stepped aside, and now I'm working as the ICLS manager at Richmond Wellbeing. We found that there were less people with psychosocial disabilities being accepted into the NDIS. What we aimed to do was to work with small to medium NDIS registered providers to look at why that was happening and how we could support them to get more successful applications through.
Okay, what were some of the examples that kind of came up from the research?
So from the research, there were a number of reasons that people were struggling to access the NDIS. One of them was stigma. So the NDIS uses fairly deficit-based framework when you're applying for the NDIS. So people with mental health conditions use recovery-based.
Okay, the language that they use.
Yeah, so everything's about recovery and how you can get to that. However, with NDIS, what they're looking for is permanent disability and impairment.
Yeah.
They're actually the two things that you need to prove in order to get an NDIS access request approved. So where you've got this sort of mismatch, it was making it really difficult for consumers to kind of say, oh yeah, I want to go back, I'll go back and I'll use this language that, you know, I'm never going to recover. When we've worked really hard, they've worked really hard to say that they can and will recover. So that was number one. Another example was evidence. So the access request process is something that's not funded by NDIS. So your average NDIS registered provider is not able to support that because they're not actually funded to do the request at all. So you need to go through your local area coordinator, LAC, or a provider like Midless who can advocate for you. The issue with that is that they're writing the applications, but they're not actually able to help the consumers by going out and finding that evidence with them. So we're relying on the consumers to go out and collect the appropriate evidence and then bring it back.
Which is rough.
Really difficult to do. And, you know, the average person is not able to understand most of the jargon that's on those forms. So for a consumer who is desperate to get approval and is sort of looking to others, it can make it really difficult. They don't know what they're asking for, but they don't realise that maybe the other people don't really know what they need to provide. So that was an issue. Then you've got other service providers like the NPSM program, which is now changed to CPS. So they will actually provide supports to go out and collect that evidence and take the consumer to doctor's appointments or whatever they need to do. However, the issue with that is that the program is really highly sought after. So there's massive wait lists and they're only being supported a couple of hours every 1 to 2 weeks, which makes it really difficult for the consumer, again, because it's a long process.
So we've got the training, which we're giving out. We've got the mentoring, which is the podcast that we're doing right now. And we've got the graphic novel, which we have in front of us. How did all of that come together?
Yeah, cool. Great question. So there were a few different materials that we needed to provide. One of the things when it comes to projects is often the expectation is just to get the training out or the document out.
Yeah.
What we really wanted to do was pull from the experience that Western Australia has, that all the providers have around us.
Yeah.
So what we decided to do was to create something that would have a long-term impact on people. So sort of pulling everything together and showing consumers and other providers where you can go for help, who you need to talk to, and kind of not in reinventing the wheel, because it's been done so many times before, and we just didn't want that paperwork to get lost on a website, collecting dust in someone's drawer or something like that. So it was an awesome thing to be a part of. I said this to David and the team, and the next day David came back and said, "What about a graphic novel?" I mean, it was everything that we were kind of spitballing the day before, and we ran with it, and it's been an amazing process to be a part of.
Can you tell me a little bit about the focus group?
Yeah, so back in April, we brought on Reach Health Promotions, and Becky White, she consulted with, I think, 24 individuals across 10 organisations to get an idea of what those gaps were and what the training needs were, what the community of practice needs were, and the mentoring needs. So we tried to gather a bunch of information. There was also a survey that was sent out to NDIS registered providers all across Western Australia, which we received some great feedback from of how people were feeling within the environment.
So all of the resources that we've put together now, the training, everything in the toolbox, that's all come from real life situations and evidence that we've gathered.
Absolutely. Not only that, we did that at the start, but also the whole way through developing the graphic novel, developing the training. We did meet with consumer reference groups for that.
So what do you think as a community the biggest learning takeaway is? How can we support each other, all trying to do the same thing?
I think the most important thing to remember is that we're all learning. The NDIS is constantly evolving and changing, and there's no way that you can possibly know everything about everything. What I will say is that organisations out there have a lot of information that they've already developed. So things to sort of help with clients' understanding. There are so many different things, so many different resources out there. So I would suggest talking to your colleagues, talking to different organisations. Don't silo yourself, and just always seek out, always be learning.
Yeah, exactly, which is one of the great things about the program, because that has the communal aspect in terms of everyone coming to the training, gives their input, gives their learning, so then our learning is continuous. And then there's also the community of practice, which is something we're working on, which we'll mention in a couple of later episodes, I believe.
Yeah, I think with the community of practice and the training, it is a really, really good opportunity to get together, talk about what is still relevant, and then update the training as needed. It should all be constantly evolving, which is the amazing thing. We have this excellent graphic novel, which is a resource that you can look at, but then there's a lot of face-to-face stuff that's going on where people will be able to provide their input. It's important that nobody thinks that they know everything. This is a group effort.
Well, we can't tie this together without our amazing leader, David. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm going pretty good. Yourself?
Not bad for today. A little bit nervous, but excited that the podcasts are up and running. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, so you've had enough coffees for today?
I'm working on my last one. So suitably caffeinated.
Lovely. So for everyone at home, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, okay. So I've been involved in the Living My Best Life project. I came on board last year, originally as a stakeholder engagement officer, and then when the project manager at the time, Christie, moved on to another project, I was able to step up and take over as a project manager. So not here right from the very beginning, but certainly, from that point where we were developing the resources and really doing a bit of a deep dive into the research that had been conducted prior to my arriving, and understanding what was needed.
What were you hoping to achieve through the program?
Look, I think one of the things that came out really clearly, for anybody reading the report, and also just the data from the NDIA's, own analysis, is that we've got a gap in the number of people who apply for an NDIS plan who have a psychosocial disability compared to those who apply with a physical disability. And the gap is, how many are successful. And we know that's, roughly about 90% in the physical disability space and about the 70% in the psychosocial. The thing for me is really about what are the barriers? Why does that 20% exist? And, look, you could do a PhD on it. There's a lot into it, but really, really simply, it's about accessing the right information, about getting the right evidence, and about navigating the process. And I think for any of the viewers or listeners, who have dealt with the NDIS know that, we're recording this at the beginning of July, literally last week. They changed the goalposts again with regards to, funding and rules, and that's pretty constant. The one thing you can be certain about with the NDIA is that nothing is certain with the NDIA. Everything keeps changing. And so we wanted to get the information together that was relevant and in an accessible format. And that's where I think the whole concept of living my best life really kind of originated from, something that was different and accessible.
Yeah, okay. So what makes up the Living My Best Life program? What are all the moving parts?
Great question. Like any slick Lamborghini, there's more than just the tires and the engine. We've really taken the key information and then brought it together in a couple of elements. So we have the graphic novel, which looks at 5 characters and their journey in seeking an NDIS plan. Now, the background to that is, I think, really critical because those 5 characters, their stories are actually drawn from real life examples. No one of them is a full person story. There are elements that have been sort of taken together, but the key parts are real, and the experiences are real, just brought into 5 characters. So the graphic novel was a great tool and resource. And one of the things I love about it, and I love the fact that in today's world where we're all about websites, frequently asked questions, can I access in that, in a format on my phone?
Yeah.
This is real old school. This is, I get in trouble saying it, and I promise myself, but this is a graphic novel like a comic book that I grew up with, and you can roll it up, put it in your back pocket, you can take it with you, you can look at it again and again. And for some people, that is the best way of learning, particularly if you are, experiencing perhaps an episode or you need to take some time to really kind of understand and process it. This graphic novel allows you to do that. So that's one of the moving parts. Obviously, the mentoring program is another because COVID has really got us to think about things differently, and providing a mentoring program via a podcast is a really innovative way to do that. The community of practice, another moving part where we get people together to share learnings, knowledge, and ideas. And then really the engine that drives it all is our training. And that's both online and face-to-face. And that training really uses all of those resources and more to be able to guide people and help people help consumers who are making an NDIS access request.
So one of the key things about the project is that it's live, it's reactive. As you said, there are changes in the NDIS space. So how has the project changed, and how is it going to be continuously adapting to changes in the future?
It's a great question, and you're absolutely right. And even as recent as March this year, just before the federal election, we saw changes in the legislation go through with the NDIA Act with regards to just providing clarity specifically for psychosocial, because there was interpretation as to whether episodic was considered permanent. And as we know, permanency is one of the key criteria for an NDIS application. So, we were able to adapt the training to take on board that change to the legislation and ensure that it reflects where it's at. So the training is very much always looking at what changes are occurring, change in government, and whilst we don't expect a major shift within the legislation, there may be some shifts with regards to how policy is interpreted. There may be some shifts over time as to how the NDIA itself is funded and what supports they're willing to fund going forward. So there's always those things that we're looking at in the training space and making sure that it's current. And we can do that with that resource because it's live training or it's online training that has live presenters, video training. So it's not something that was written in 2021 based on what was accurate in 2021 and hasn't been updated. It's something that quite literally, next Friday is the next training session. And if something was to change between now and then, we could adapt a slide or we could add a note to look. We really need to bring this to people's attention.
Okay, say I was a service provider. What would be 3 bits of information that you would give me based off of all the learnings of the project so far?
Look, I think the training is designed primarily for small to medium NDIS service providers. So the key things that I would say to any service provider is, keep abreast of the changes. Sometimes we can get so busy delivering the services that we find it hard to sort of pause, step back and actually sharpen the axe, so to speak, before we go back in and keep trying to cut down the trees. So I think this is free training. It's nothing more than a little bit of your time or your staff's time to be involved. It's been funded by the Department of Communities. So my first thing would be take advantage of the training, that's there. The second part would be take advantage of the resources. All these items that we talked about are being gathered together in an NDIS application toolkit. And that's going to exist beyond the life of the project. So the training will stop, but the resources that have been developed will be available online for people to be able to access. And so appreciate that not in all cases people can access or give the time for training, but certainly look at the resources. The third thing I think that's really critical is, from a psychosocial disability perspective, understand that, and many of us in this space know this already, but it can be traumatic for people with psychosocial disabilities having to apply for the NDIS. Sometimes they may be having to re-engage with trauma. Sometimes the rejection can trigger, a traumatic experience. And so I think it's really important that as a provider, we understand how we can best give support to people with psychosocial disabilities as they're going through this process. Now, I'll be the first to admit that's challenging when you're not funded to do it, and I get that completely. But I also understand that people who work in the sector do it because they have a heart, they have compassion, and they really genuinely want to support people in this area. So I think in that space, if you're able to bring together all of what we've got and be able to support these people in their application process in a really respectful and understanding way, particularly from the trauma informed perspective, that's really critical.
One of the best things I found from the training is that every week there are new experiences from different people and everybody learns off of each other.
It's a really interactive training. What all our trainers do, you involved, Jake, is this training is about presenting the information, but then it's also about sharing stories. There's something inherently powerful about storytelling. And, a great example, that we've shared in the training is, when we talk about informal supports, a young man with a psychosocial disability, they were saying, oh no, it's okay. He doesn't need anything with mobility. He gets transported to all his appointments. And then you tease that out a little bit further by his 81-year-old grandfather. And that's the only person who's able to get him to these appointments. Yeah. Yes, that's an informal support, but it's not one that has, that is as robust as perhaps a younger person or having a support worker, to be able to do that. So it's really, and that came from an example that was shared with us and that we were able to sort of bring into the training. So that storytelling Always de-identified, always respectful, but always powerful, because they're real stories, real examples of how people, have gathered evidence, how people have had respectful conversations about evidence that perhaps hasn't been to the standard that you would expect, recognizing that the people who are asked to give this evidence are often time poor as well, and that can be challenging. You need to keep coming back to it. You need to keep refreshing. And these podcasts will be obviously a resource that people can access time and time again. And, I don't think they'll be watching this particular episode, but I know that you've got a whole series of particular topics that are specific to challenges that people face or barriers that people experience in applying for the NDIS. So, you may just want to go back to the evidence podcast, or you may wish to be looking at the domains podcast and understanding how to, how they impact. And that will refresh the training as well. People are welcome to do the training more than once, but we're all time poor. However, sometimes you just need to listen to something again and go, oh, that's right, I remember the discussion we were having in the training about this. This is what I'm missing when I'm doing, this access request for this particular person.
And that concludes our first episode. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, we're going to be talking about reframing conversations, how we can support our consumers when there's so much trauma there. How can we tackle myths that we don't know exist and maybe don't know the answers to? All of this will be in our next episode. I hope you join us, and may you all live your best life. Thank you.